Hi, everyone. My name is Karen at the Community Services Department, and I'm here to introduce you to two wonderful representatives of the Beverly Hills Art Show community. Anthony, can you take it away?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen, and thanks, Shana. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to just start with introductory slideshow of a couple images here. I'm honored to be part of the Beverly Hills Art Show, and I want to just talk a little bit about my background and process before Shane and I get into a conversation about the work itself. My original passion is that of music. Being a classical piano player, I was interested in studying the notes and messages of composers from hundreds of years ago and try to figure out what they were trying to tell us. I'm also an architect, an interior designer, and early on in my childhood, I fantasized about imaginary worlds where my toy dinosaurs could sing songs and my stuffed animals could have in-depth conversations. There's a but to all of this, and that's as a musician, it was always frustrating that it took so many years to perfect a single piece of music, that we were expected to have this classical perfection and learn every 1,000 notes on that piece of paper. Similarly, in architecture, it's a slow process. It's an artistic creative field that involves clients and budgets, city codes and construction challenges and engineering and so many things, so many logistics that it can take years to complete one project. And in some cases, a monumental project like the Sistine Chapel in Rome, it took generations. This had me looking at jazz music and asking the question, why can't we do things faster, freer, spontaneously, organically? And I start to infuse some of that thinking into my art. As David Sudnow says, can we go from no one place in particular to no one place in particular? Just always be in this artistic process and not really knowing where you're going and saying that's perfectly fine. In jazz, you take a theme of music from Duke Ellington and you just add on top of that as a musician and add your own voice. And not having to know what you're going to do. And to me, that freedom improvisation really launched my exploration into my most recent body of work, which I simply call flower painting. There are 6 steps that I use in creating these paintings. The first is the search for a painting, not my own, but to find another artist's work, maybe something discarded at a flea market or a garage sale. Specifically, I'm looking for still lifes of classically painted flowers, usually in these kind of traditional, even somewhat cheesy gold frames. Step 2 is to really think outside the box and realize that the frame that these paintings come in are also part of the canvas. And as an artist, we should recognize that and paint and add our ideas to this canvas. To add personal messages, I like to collage pages, sometimes out of a magazine, sometimes out of, this is a memoir of mine from 2017, and start collaging that. When I say to think outside of the box or to break the frame, I'm talking even literally. In this case, I've got this old frame from a flea market, found it was not quite the right size for the canvas, and I said, you know, it really doesn't matter. It still implies the idea of frame. And it still opens up that discussion that when we were kids, we said we couldn't always color within the lines, and I'm saying that's perfectly fine. This step, looking at the still life, and I call it an aura, where I try to bring these flowers back alive and outline the flowers in the flower vase. Then add a layer of other textures, of gesso, and starting to question, what is the subject matter? Is it the frame? Is it the aura? Is it the original flowers? That blur that you see is intentional, having the viewer question themselves and their position to the painting. Lastly, it's adding resin, varnish, other aspects of paints that just keep building on top of this. the result is an exploration in which I feel like I'm talking to an artist, but I've never met this artist, and I'm trying to see what he's trying to say, similarly to me reading a music of Mozart and trying to understand what he was trying to say. I also like the idea that it's kind of a reincarnation or rejuvenation of something that someone has discarded, that even some of these paintings have been found in the trash, and I'm able to give it a new life. So that's why I've entitled this as having a dialogue with someone that I've probably will never meet, but I enjoy having this conversation. And I end with this one phrase. Most of you who bought worn designer clothing or jeans, you get this tag that I think kind of captures my philosophy in this recent body of work. And I'll read this tag in my jeans. It actually says, variations and changes in color and surface are not defects of the material, but considered to be part of the fabric's natural beauty. And with that, that is my introduction. I'll turn it over to Shana.
Wow, I mean, that is so clear, and there's so much. What I appreciate so much about what you just did for everyone there is the walking through of the process in a way, because the finished product seems all the things that you say it is: interpretive, a little bit untidy on purpose, open-ended in certain physical ways, as well as the idea. And so to really lay out the intentionality of the evolution of that process, I think is so helpful for people who are looking at the work for the first time. And, you know, just as an aside, I am obsessed with jazz as a metaphor with infinite potential for every aspect of life and human behavior. If you want, you could talk about jazz as a metaphor and the idea that you can't improv until you have internalized the rules, right, and you have learned how everything is supposed to be, so that the spontaneity. I've never played saxophone. I can't just pick it up and improv. I have to be good at it so that I can let loose later. And that interplay between the rules and the broken rules and the expertise and the spontaneity, I find so absolutely fascinating to think about as part of a creative process. And when you were talking about architecture, the same thing, I kept thinking, like, yeah, you're up against things like the laws of physics. You can't just, I mean, you know, even Frank Gehry has to make sure it's not going to fall down. Right? So you can make something that's super crazy town. You can go all the way to a Bernard Tschumi place, or all the way to any kind of interpretive architecture that you want. No matter what it looks like, inside of it, it has to be structural.
You're exactly right. And it was Johann Sebastian Bach that told his students, you know, if you're going to be a rule breaker, or today we use the word disruptor, you have to learn the rules. You have to know what you're breaking. You're going to have to spend a lot of years being disciplined first before you can kind of exploit and disrupt and try new things. In architecture, you're right. You want to do crazy, adventurous building designs and interiors, but we are structured by gravity and the laws of physics, and you learn that first, and to become someone like Tschumi or Gehry, they've learned those things well, and they work with engineers, and then they find the freedom to explore. My interest in jazz also has to do with just the simple process of painting or drawing. These days we use technology quite a bit. It can be used to improvise. You have to be pretty facile at it. I'm more interested in saying, if I'm coloring a drawing or painting and I spill paint, maybe what I've just spilled is something I should explore. In jazz, the idea of the mistake doesn't have any relevance. If you hear a jazz pianist play and he plays the wrong note, what he'll usually do is bang on that note a few more times to make sure you hear it, and then make that into something. In classical music, if you play the wrong note, it would be as if your entire concert is a failure and you might as well get off the stage at that point.
And you know, I you can go in, so first of all, that's hilarious, but so true. But I think like the relationship between how those ideas manifest in the work, because you wouldn't look at your work and necessarily think, oh, jazz and architecture, right? But at a level of the energy of it, it's so clear. And the idea that, you know, bless their hearts, the artists whose work you are salvaging, renovating, reinterpreting, etc. God bless. They, from what I can tell, seem to be sort of like they were interested in the rules, right? It was like, this is what classical still life painting looks like, and I'm going to try to get good at it in a very linear sense. And then I'm going to put it in a gold frame, because that's what you do with art.
You know, I've collected so many of these flower paintings, and you're right, there's a formula to it, but not just to the painting itself. The frames all start with a white linen mat board, then a gold frame. Even the way in which the canvas is nailed to the frame from the back side is a precise method that they've all been taught, perhaps in a Sunday art class, or maybe just through some mentor. It's amazing how strong the formula is, which is why I'm so interested in taking that and just breaking those rules. Having studied all these decades classical music, I'm now interested in making mistakes and questioning that. And actually, I would think the most interesting thing is, I would wish one day, maybe someone's looking at my website and email me or call me and say, hey, that's actually one of my flower paintings. And I get to literally have a conversation and hear what he thinks. I mean, it may be considered blasphemous that I've painted over his painting, or maybe he'll be excited that it was lost years ago and sold off, or he even threw it in the garbage can and somehow it ended up in Los Angeles.
Well, it reminds me a little bit of how, like, you know, in pop music, the idea of an artist covering another artist's song and making it their own and sort of going against type, right? So you have, you know, Johnny Cash singing the 9 Inch Nails song, or Kurt Cobain, you know, Nirvana singing the David Bowie song, and you're like, oh, I wouldn't have, or, you know, the Cro-Mags singing And Then He Kissed Me. You know, there's a lot you can play with. But in the jazz world, there's this idea of the standard, where right, you're not necessarily responding to the person who wrote the song, because maybe you don't even know. Maybe no one knows at this point. But it's a song that everybody does. So everyone has a relationship to this central idea of the standard song. Right. And interpreting it is not a surprise decision. It's like something that you do. And I feel like that is a little bit more like this, like they're doing the standard, you know, beauty, bowl of flowers, maybe a little bit of flirting with a crazy pattern on the bowl or something, but they're basically taking, you know, and then you're like, okay, that's a standard motif of art history, but I'm going to do my thing to it.
The approach here is not to take anything too seriously and not to make things overly precious. These standard tunes, when they were written, they probably were quite honored and revered. And over time, every musician knows them. And we try to say it's not so precious, and everything is transitory and okay to change. The biggest example I can think of, there's an art complex downtown LA, you probably know, called the Container Yard. The owner is a colleague and a client of mine. And what's really amazing is that this is a group of street artists, and they work on canvases that are the size of entire buildings. We're talking 30 feet tall, 60 feet long. They paint for weeks and weeks to come up with the most incredible murals of street art. And then it's done and perhaps lasts for no more than a day or two before the next street artist paints over that mural with another work. And you would think if you went into a museum and painted over something at the Getty, you would probably be shot and put in prison. But at the Container Yard, it's expected. It's about the process. The end result is not meant to be precious. and framed and have a museum tag put in front of it. The artist is happy, he did it, he Instagrammed a couple of photos, and he's off to another painting, and he's not offended that another artist has decided to paint over what he just spent a month painting.
In fact, it's rather expected.
Yes,
And
it's
I love the
expected.
Container Yard, and I love Ash. I think they're fabulous people over there. And the idea that, exactly as you say, that like everyone's on board with that, right?
Exactly.
And that, you know, and maybe you know who that person's gonna be, and maybe it's gonna be some stranger, and you hope it's good. But even if it's not, it's cool because someone's right behind them too, and it's this ongoing, almost like a raga. Like it just kind of never needs to end if you don't want it to. And I love that. And then also, as far as the actual materials go, I'm really interested. I love the wit of the collage being sort of ripped from your own memoir. And I know you use other things as well, but of course, like as a writer, I'm obsessed with the idea that you're literally putting your own story physically in the work, because people talk about how their art tells a story, but you're like, nah, this is actually a page from my story,
right?
And it's in the art now. And so that sort of breaking of that sort of like membrane between the concept and the action of physically doing it, like when you say you're adding yourself to the painting, it's quite literal as well. It's not just a way of characterizing the overpainting. And I really do love that also. I have a very specific question about that. When you choose the elements of the collage, is it like a pure formal decision that is also kind of randomized, like whatever page, or do you actually consider the content of the text as you're adding it? The pieces.
It is completely random.
Oh.
And intentionally. So it may be as structured as all these pages will come from one chapter, or I will use only the left side of odd number pages, or I will use only the sketches from my sketchbook or pages from a journal. It's not meant to be, it's meant to be both literal and implicit. In that you're correct, it's literally my story because they are my words, but it's not explicit in that because they're cut up and they're just pasted, it's kind of just sending, it's like a message in a bottle that hasn't quite made it all the way to the shore. So you're getting pieces of my story. And my goal is one day my painting is also maybe discarded or left at a yard sale, and someone discovers that and tries to read it and then adds its own story. And again, this is the improvisation of taking a melody, a standard or tune, and someone improvises on a tune. Then someone improvises on the improvisation, and it just keeps going until you might wonder, where's the tune? Is it even there anymore? And I'm saying, well, it doesn't have to be. And so this is what I consider progress in art and progress in civilization and the relationship between art and audience.
I think that's really wonderful. And the idea too that, you know, you'd be okay if it happened to you later, I think is also incredibly authentic and empathetic as well. And I love that you said cut up, because of course that was how William Burroughs edited his own work. It's like, I'm not really sure how this is going, so I'm going to put it in the shredder and then tape it back together,
right,
and see if that's better.
Exactly.
And the amount of courage, I think, as any kind of creator, to impose that kind of chaos on your own creation. I mean, I call it courage in a certain way because I'm a writer, and the idea that somebody would do a cut up on something I'd written is thrilling and exhilarating and terrifying. And that whole mechanism of control and intention and letting things just happen, you know, it's I understand why people are enchanted with that process. And I think it's because it doesn't really come naturally to most people to invite chance into their work in those ways. Which I mean, maybe I'm just projecting, but for me, I find that willingness to be open to kind of the vagaries of energetic and material fate to be, low-key brave.
We do have a viewer question. Anthony, you must have seen a lot of different canvases to choose from as the basis for your work. When you are at a flea market, what happens when you have to decide among different canvases? What's the process? For example, do you throw out earlier choices as you find others?
That's a great question. It's going to sound kind of funny, but the initial parameter is I won't pay more than $25 for the canvas, meaning that if someone's really precious about their canvas and wants to sell it for $400, that's not the process I'm starting with, because unfortunately, I'm not going to be honoring it as a final piece of beautiful art that hangs in my dining room. It's a canvas for me in the literal sense, a canvas for me to start with. I look specifically, as I mentioned, only for those kind of style of flower still lives in gold frames with white linen boards, and they do seem to pop up almost everywhere I go. I gather almost every time I see one. I'll just buy it, and they just stay in my studio until it's ready for me to start another painting.
There's also a preservation kind of aspect to what you're doing that reminds me of like architecture as well. Like you go into a historic property, some certain amount of it needs to remain original for whatever code and concept, but then it needs to be updated and expanded, and like whatever that negotiation is. You're not buying a property with a house on it to flatten the house and build. You're engaging with what was there already. And I feel like that metaphor carries over, because I realized later, like, they don't care about the painting. They're selling you the frame, but like it looks prettier with a bad painting in it. There's actually a preservation in your transformation as well.
You're exactly right. Yeah, I worked with a British artist named Stuart Haygarth, and we designed a chandelier for a restaurant downtown, the Chaya downtown restaurant. And we said, we don't want to just buy another chandelier from, Wayfair Restoration Hardware. Let's make one. And his idea was to go to the beach and collect all the toys that are lost, found in the sand, left behind in the garbage can. And we found 1,500 plastic toys and made a chandelier out of that. And it's exactly as you said, Shana, it's an idea of salvation. It's an idea of sustainability, of being green outside of electric car and solar panels, but a really different kind of artistic way of being green. The other thing I was thinking, as you were mentioning, Shana, people do buy these canvases from flea markets because if you can get a canvas in a frame for $20, think about how much it actually costs to buy a new canvas in that frame. It would be 5 times that price. My interest is that someone already worked on it, and there should be something there that I can take as inspiration. Going back to, like I was saying with classical music, someone already wrote this piano sonata, so I need to dig into it and figure out what I can add to it and how I could reinterpret it.
And it's such an expansive approach. It's the kind of thing, as you have done, that can be sort of grafted onto many different kinds of activities and many different kinds of approaches. But then the process itself is so fascinating to me because of how, like I'm saying, you can see transferring that way of doing things into almost like a worldview, if you want to, as well as a way of making these very compelling objects.
I think the main theme in my work, and this includes in architecture and in music and in writing, is the idea of the audience. That there are messages to be told, whether it's me to someone, whether it's a different artist to me through the painting. There are stories to be told. I'm this vehicle to tell these stories. If I'm designing a house for someone, I'm listening to their stories about their Thanksgiving dinners, or the dog that they want to have, or the mother-in-law that's going to move in. there's an audience there that if I'm creating a library for university, there's students as the audience, playing a piece of music, whether it's just to my girlfriend or to an audience of 100 people, that's still an audience. Same with writing, same with painting. There is this idea that there's always an audience, and we may know who it is. In a case of a painting, someone buys it, maybe it hangs in their living room or a conference room. I don't know who the extended audience is, but I'm excited to know that it's out there and people are talking about it, and these messages of mine are just reaching a broader and broader audience.
It's wonderful. I love that. And obviously, I failed up top to thank Beverly Hills for Art Show for having us, but that is exactly part of the beauty of the Beverly Hills Art Show, is that sharing with an audience, like, hey, I'm an art critic, so no shade to the gallery system, but there is a world of potentially interested humans beyond the people that go into art galleries. And one of the things I've always loved about Beverly Hills Art Show is that extreme inclusivity of like, come one, come all, whatever you think your interest is, just come in and see. And I feel like you have that energy and you're hunting for the materials, you do your magic to the work, and exactly what you just said about putting it in front of every audience you can think of. I think that continuum is a really very inclusive and empathetic way to approach the art world, and for the artists who participate in it. And I love what you just said. And I think it's true. There are a lot of different ways into the work that a lot of different people can find and respond to. Do you have any other questions from the people?
So this question is, I am not trying to go all artist's way on you, but does it ever occur to you that others are not as fluid in changing career paths or artistic directions? Why do you think you're that way?
I think it's a pretty simple answer from my standpoint, in that it's all one act of artistic movement. I don't see a separation between designing a Buddhist temple or writing an article for a media outlet or painting. To me, it's all happening at the same time. I will go from painting, take a few steps, and go to my piano and play some songs, and then hop on my laptop and write a blog post. In my mind, they're not separate disciplines. It's one entire movement for me. It's my one entire existence. So I don't know if I've ever shifted from field to field or from career to career, even as a young kid. All four of these and other explorations and crafts as well has always just infused every aspect of my day.
I'm more like the person who asked the question than I am like you, but I understand that if you don't feel that you are choosing.
When I did my graduate studies, I had to choose whether I'm going to go to Juilliard, for example, for classical music degree, or to Harvard's Graduate School of Design, and you choose that course, but one doesn't negate the other. I happen to choose architecture and interior design as a profession. That doesn't prevent me from playing a recital for friends or painting at night. I think, though, if I chose to be a classical concert pianist, that might have not allowed me to open up a studio in Culver City and be an architect. So I don't know. I guess it's not really a balance as much as you said. There's just a lack of boundaries intentionally by design. I'm honored and excited to be part of the Beverly Hills show again. It's unfortunate we can't all be together on the lawn. I encourage everyone to go to the website. If you're interested in more of my work, it's at anthonypoonart.com, and my writing's at anthonypoon.com. And I'm eager to hear from anyone out there with any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you both Anthony and Shana. We really appreciate your having joined us today, and we too hope to be back out on that lawn.
Thank you both
very
so
much.
Anthony. Thank you forever. That was amazing.
Thank you, Shana.
I learned a lot today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.